Colin Rogers. I'm the Regional Health and Safety Manager for LaWas, North America. I am a mining engineer by trade, safety by choice. I know that's very masochistic, but that transition happened about 10 years ago, and it's been a very interesting ride since then. The engineering background does play into the presentation, so what we're going to be talking about today is something that we all do. How do we perform compliance audits at our sites to make sure that Mr. MSHA is happy and that we're not going to jail, right? We all do that, but it's a difficult process. It's a process that oftentimes doesn't produce a lot of analytical results. So we have come up with a way of partnering with a company, Rapid Biz Apps, to develop an application that lets us do it using this guy. Okay? So a little bit of background on how this all started. Long time ago in a career far away before my wife told me to get a real job, I owned a consulting company whose bread and butter was doing mock MSHA style inspections. And being an engineer, I really wanted to have a system that met a couple of criteria. I had to have relatable results, meaning what I was doing in the field, I wanted to relate to what they had actually violation-wise from MSHA. I needed to get physical deliverables. I needed to have something at the end of the day to bring to a client and say, this is what I have for you, right? So it's not just numbers and emails and things like that. I needed to calculate total potential penalties. So if I was MSHA and they did this, it would cost you X amount so I could eventually justify my existence, right? Because if my cost is lower than what MSHA's would be, well, then I can keep doing business with you. Because safety is a very unique profession. And it was a hard transition for me initially coming from an engineering background, because as a safety professional, the more I work, the more stuff I do, the less things happen in the field, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. 0 injuries, 0 incidents, and 0 citations. So I work my tail off so nothing happens. That's kind of neat, right? Versus as an engineer, the more work I do, the more money I save, the more throughput I get. I can quantify my existence. So I wanted a way to transition that same attitude from the engineering field into the safety world. And as a consultant, it worked very well. It's also worked very well now that I moved to one mining operation and one company, so we can justify other things. So starting out, looking at the two different worlds that we live in the safety world, reactive and proactive information, right? Leading and lagging indicators, we've all heard that before. Where do we want to live as a safety professional? In the reactive side or the proactive side? This is a discussion, not just a presentation, so what do you think? Yeah, because we want to prevent things from happening. We want to prevent people from getting hurt. We want to prevent violations from occurring. But we often focus most of our analysis on the reactive. Well, even though it's all bad, right? We got to pay for citations, we got to pay for the terminations. It's all inconvenient to fix because Mr. Inspector says this is wrong, fix it, but doesn't tell you how to fix it. You fix it, then it's not right according to what he wants. That's kind of like playing who's on first. But we live in this world because that data is already there. We can go mine that information. Versus down here in the proactive side, the data doesn't exist because nothing's happened yet. So how do we get that data to exist? That's the big question. But looking at the reactive side, the information, and I can't believe this is actually coming out of my mouth, that MSHA does really well is post all of this stuff. So you can go in and get the violation history for the past 20 years of any mine that's out there, right? And it unfortunately comes as a text file, which is too big for you to open in Excel, so you got to put it into Access and do some really cool black magic that's beyond me. Get it into an Excel-based format for a particular mine ID or group of IDs that then allows you to do the statistical analysis. That's a lot, right? So you have to be a fairly righteous data ninja to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what you need. But it produces some really cool information when you're done. And this is a landing page for essentially a copy and paste analytical program that I made in Excel to look at particular mining companies. And you can see this one, I know it's probably hard to read, but we can identify things by subpart, by specific parts of gravity and negligence. In this particular mine, Mr. Mine Manager, did you know in the last 20 years your company has spent not just the assessed penalties, but what you have paid to the government is $620,000. Did you know that in that same time period you had 54 violations of 573200 scaling and it cost you $134,000? Right? We typically try to forget our regulatory history and we go from one inspection to the next without looking at it as a whole. And this was great justification, but I wanted more, right? Because this is all that lagging stuff. Because the problem is, it already happened. Okay? It's a good foundation to build on. We can't forget our past history, but we need to build and be proactive in our audits as well. So how do we do proactive analysis? Well, we start off this way. Who's done this before? Who's been this guy? Okay, you walk around, you take pictures, you throw it into a PowerPoint, maybe you have a closeout meeting about it, maybe you don't. But what does this get you? This gets you an instantaneous result. Right? Do you remember what you did or the results from 4 audits ago, doing it this way? Yes or no, that was a question. Silence is acceptance, so we can go that route too. No, you don't, right? You don't remember. So there must be a better way. And I'll admit it, I'm a millennial, I'm part of the Nintendo generation, so my first thought was, oh, there's gotta be an app for that. Unfortunately, there wasn't. Not at this time. So, when I was trying to think of a process that would allow me to develop the analysis on the proactive on the front end, we ran into a couple of problems. Problem one is we have to actually create the data, right? But we have to create the data in a way that it's relational to the reactive data. So we do our inspection, we go around the site, and we figure out all of our hazardous conditions. But then we have to evaluate those conditions in the same way that MSHA does if you want it to be MSHA comparable information. Okay, so we're looking at all the parts of gravity and negligence and persons affected, which means that we essentially have to channel our own MSHA inspector. And honestly, I think this is the hardest part of the program in developing consistency in the data that you put in. Remember, statistics is only as good as the information that you put into the system to begin with. Right? So if you are going around your site and you're saying, oh, everything is no lost work days and it's unlikely or there's no likelihood and evaluating things on the base level, you're cheating yourself, right? So you have to learn to be MSHA. I've done a lot of training within my region and the people who are implementing this system on how to channel that inner inspector. Right, going through some training at CSM a number of years ago, the ACRI classes, there's some classes on the East Coast that we put people in, and it's, I think it's North Carolina, but how MSHA works, how they evaluate things, reading the citation and order writing handbook, which is just a blast if you've never done that before. But learning the process of MSHA, that gives you the foundation. Problem two is once we get all of this stuff, we have to do something with it, right? We get all this information. We have to coalesce it, we have to put it into some kind of functional database of your choice, all right? Then we have to analyze it. How do we analyze it? What do we look for? And then we need to get deliverables. Okay? We've got to provide feedback to the people that we're auditing. Problem three is comparing those, right? To make sure that what I'm doing on the front end meets the same expectation as the back end, putting that square peg or round peg in the square hole, at least in this case, right? It's difficult. So the old way, what we used to do, the way that I came up with as a consultant, very time consuming. It starts off with the same way we've done it in the field with a camera and a notepad. You're walking around, you're doing an evaluation of the site. And in this case, you're writing things down for likelihood, severity, gravity, number of persons, getting all that information. Built a template in Acrobat that I could fill in that looks just like an MSHA violation, all right, a citation. Create a PDF. The PDF goes to the person who's in charge of that area. So I like having that physical deliverable that I can take and I can hand, Mr. Maintenance Manager, this is what I found in your area, right? It's impactful. Take the information from the PDF, put it into our database, run our analytics, and then we can generate PowerPoints and Word documents for reports, as well as tracking systems for item completion, right? To make sure that these don't fall off of the radar. And it's a lot of work. It takes 5 to 8 minutes total running through this process per violation, and that might not seem like a lot of time, but and I won't tell you where this site is. I found 91 potential violations. And at this site, they run about 120,000 man hours a year, so it's not that big. 91 potential violations, and it took 10 to 12 hours to process all this information after it was done in the field. Now, as a consultant, what did I care, right? I got paid by the hour, that was fine. But now as a guy in industry, back in one operation, and I'm doing quarterly inspections at 5 and 6 different sites, plus helping my other regions, ooh, now we're talking about a lot of time, okay? So, working with Rapid Biz Apps, we have come together and developed a system that is now integrated into either a smartphone or a tablet. So I'm still walking through the same essential process in the field, but instead of my camera and my notepad, I'm using an iPad. And I am evaluating things directly on the iPad. I'm taking pictures, making annotations, and it's doing all of the background stuff, transferring from my notes into Acrobat to the database. It does all that automatically. So now when I hit the submit, I'm done with this audit. It kicks out PDFs that I can either email or print out and provide to the mine operator, and it kicks out a raw CSV file that I can copy and paste that information directly into whatever computation that I want to use, right? Whatever analytics that you want to run. Huge, huge time saver. All right, so the idea is that every day that you're doing an audit, at the end of the day, you want to wrap up with the site, because now I've seen conditions in the field. I have knowledge of those conditions, and we don't want to get into that fun area with MSHA about 104D1s and unwarrantable failure. So I can close out with them, hand them the documents that have a corrective action date on it, and by the time I come in for the next day, if it's a serious thing, we're already done. But I got the information, I got the analytics. Okay? So how does that work? Again, tablet-based. It's a real time in the field, and that's what I love about it more than the pictures and the notes, is I'm standing there doing the evaluations for likelihood, for severity, as I'm looking at the condition. I'm not taking a picture of it or taking several and then writing it down and going back hours later into the computer at the hotel that night and figuring out what it was. I'm doing the process looking at the hazard. It has a lot of pre-populated fields in it to make sure that we're following the same trend that MSHA does with their violations. Things like mine site ID, responsible persons, again, who that is being served to. Location and zone is a big one. It's something we added to the list that MSHA doesn't track. Well, MSHA does either primary or mill, but that doesn't help us out, right? Automatically generating things like time, date, and a unique violation number. The unique violation number allows us to track these individually, so I can close them out with the sites. And I can also run some analytics on how long did it take you to close it out. This was the anticipated termination date. Why didn't you get it done in time, right? So time saving through pre-populated fields and drop downs and all that. It's everything that you would expect in an application that is point and click. This is what it looks like, a screenshot of the PDF that comes out, very similar to that MSHA violation. We track a couple of different things. So I track the differences between unsafe conditions and unsafe actions, right? Something that MSHA doesn't do. We assign a priority, high, medium, and low, just as a representation of that hazard in the field, which auto-populates down here at the bottom as the termination due date. This middle section is a little different, where MSHA, you put in the condition and practice, what was the issue in the field, as well as the violation standard number. But I put in the language of the violation as well. So when I hand this to the mine manager, the plant manager, who is ever responsible for that area, they have everything that they need to know about that particular standard and hazard. What was wrong and what the expectation is, so they don't have to go look it up later. Okay. It's designed to be a two-piece document. The back page fits 2 pictures, so now we have the front page with the information, the back page with the document, so we can show what the issue was. Of course, guarding in here where the guard had moved off. Okay. Makes it very simple. The last part on here, sited location. You can divide your site up into as many locations as you want. And when you're running through these analytics later, you can pick and choose, okay, what is my main issue in the lime handling house, right? What is my potential violation exposure there versus having the shotgun methodology of just trying to retrain and redo everything for everybody on the site. All right, I can specify my training and how I'm going to achieve workplace examinations and everything else by segregating and breaking apart the parts of the mine. We run the same analytics. It looks very similar as the one before because all the information that we put in there is the same information that MSHA uses. A couple of different things as well, like down here at the bottom, we can see violation count, potential penalty, average per, which tells you about the severity, right? Again, breaking down the exposure. So I can see that this guy right here, he is the worst out of the bunch, but we can run these by individual and unique reference number by the event. We can run them by the year or in total for the site or the region. Okay. So just looking at a graph that has a few different pieces of information on it, again, subdivided by location of the plant. The blue is the count of the potential violations. The green is the minimum penalty that would be paid for that violation count, and the orange being what they would have paid if I was MSHA and found this. So we can definitely see down here, I know this one's hard to read, that it says building, shops, and grounds, ancillary facilities around the site. They had some problems. A lot of that was in housekeeping, right? So this shows you that, okay, I need to focus my efforts and I need to talk to the site management to focus their efforts in cleaning up this particular area. Because stone handling, where we feed stone into the kilns, that wasn't a problem. We found zero. Okay? Why waste our time trying to fix a zero? Zero's what we're going for, right? So some of the database stuff we can do, again, looking at individual standards and subparts and locations. It's however you want to cut it, whatever your expertise and knowledge is in Excel, because you can just copy and paste right in. You can do whatever you want. Individual audits by quarter, by year. I look at all of those trends and look at my region compared to other regions as well. Improving the training, justifying capital projects. So it's not only about getting the people better trained to do workplace examination and hazard recognition. I've used this process to help plant managers, to help regional engineers justify projects and improvements at sites based on potential liability through citations. That's been very effective as well. And the question is, does it work? So I started with LaWas in April of 2015, and this is my underground mine that I first started at that has the longest data stretch. So what we're looking at in the blue is the number of MSHA violations that we are receiving. Again, about 100 to 120,000 man hours a year, so not a big site, but we were getting consistently in the high teens to low 20s per quarter, okay? Quarterly inspections being underground, which is not good. So program starts in May of 2015. After a couple of quarters, and look at our reduction here, from mid-20s down to really low single digits, and then even a couple of quarters later, a zero, right? And it's being able to go in the field and focus your audits and figure out what your targets are using the reactive data initially, and then building on that as you go. So what does that trend look like over time? Well, it looked pretty good until I took a new job with the company as a regional manager and didn't have time to focus my audits on any particular site. And what did we start doing? Well, we started going back up. And then we had that oh crap moment and reinvigorated the audit process, and we started going back down. Now, everything being fair, there's a lot of variability in MSHA. You know, every inspector is different, field office and district, which is why you see a little bit of up and down over here. But in general, the step change between where we were and where we are is significant, and it was the result of an auditing protocol that was brought into the site, embraced by the site, and embraced by the company. Okay. So what can you do with this? Well, the greatest part, we're trying to protect people. I know we talked a lot about compliance, but we're identifying things in the field. And even though the standard may say that you have to have a berm or guardrail, Okay, that saved me some money, but I'm also protecting a person from falling off that exposed edge. Okay, so it's all about people. We lower those violations rate, we get those VPIDs and RPIDs down. We can decrease those assessed penalties, right? The number of penalty dollars that we have paid over the last few years has decreased significantly. Between 18 and 19, we realized a 57% reduction in penalties because the stuff that MSHA is now finding is that low-hanging fruit. Okay, it's not the really bad stuff that we saw before. Training is huge, focused and targeted training for areas of potential liability, knowing what those are ahead of time to train people to be your eyes and ears in the field so that they can again look for this stuff in their particular areas, and improving those process and validating your performance. Again, safety being one of those where the harder I work, the less stuff happens, the more I can valorize what I do, right? The more beneficial it is to me and the company. Right? So in addition to the potential violations, I wanted this to be a well-rounded program where we're not just being the safety cop and the bad guy in the field. So we look at a couple other things as well. Best practices, this is designed to be a one-page sheet that I can send out to the other mines within my region or within the company. Hey, so-and-so operation, they are doing really well here. If you need help with it, talk to them. There are different categories that we put these in, and those are in the database as well. So if there's another mine that says I'm having a problem with widget number 1, they can go through, look it up, and pull up all the best practice numbers within that system, go through them, and see what other sites are doing. Same thing with suggestions. Things that in their current condition may not yet be citable, or maybe we just do it in a better way, right? So what could happen, and then what do we need to change to make it better? Right? And each one of those has pictures and things associated with it. So it's been a very time-consuming process, but also a very valuable process, right? We've had a lot of success with the program. It meets my desires as an engineer, right, to get that statistical analysis up front and not just rely on that lagging data that everybody seems to use. So any questions, comments, concerns, or confessions? We can do confessions as well.
I know we're running into lunch, but of course we have time if you guys have a question or two.